What's going on, everybody? Welcome into Bill's Chat Live. We are here every Friday night, and we cannot thank you enough for choosing to spend your Friday night with us. I am Josh McCarty. With me, as always, is Luka. Luka, how are you doing on this Friday evening?
I'm doing better. It was a rough night into the morning and stuff, and we'll obviously get into that later, I believe, and whatnot. But I'm doing better. It was kind of an easy work day, at least, to kind of let the day coast by. I'm excited to get into a little bit more of a routine here, do something that we do every week, of course, and talk a little bit Bills football, distract myself a little bit because yeah, I mean, there's just it's been a day. It's been a day.
Yeah, there's a lot of pain out there in the the Buffalo sports universe right now. For those that haven't heard, legendary Sabres announcer Rick Jeanneret passed away on Thursday, and that was a tough blow to Sabres fans everywhere. My guy Luka is as hardcore as it gets about the Sabres. I know it hit him hard. We're going to dedicate a good portion of our show on the back end to just talking about Rick Jeanneret, what he meant to Luka, what he's meant to Sabres fans, and just kind of sharing some memories, sharing some thoughts. And we hope you guys will enjoy that conversation. Luka, we are going to start, though, with the Bills preseason game because they have game number 2 coming up tomorrow night against the Pittsburgh Steelers, kicking off at 6:30 p.m. And just going into this game, here's what we know. The starters are going to play. Sean McDermott said they're going to play about a quarter and a half. My first question to you is, do you think it's value added to have starters play in the preseason, or are you very much just get my guys to the regular season 100% healthy?
Um, so I think there's an argument for both. I am kind of on the side of I do like them kind of going into the game day mentality, getting some sort of action in. I would just be ultra cautious about it. I'm in the camp of I don't need to see them for a half. I don't even really need to see them for a quarter, depending on how the game goes. Obviously, game flow matters. If all of a sudden Pittsburgh has the ball for 10 minutes, you might only get one drive in the first quarter, and you might extend them into the second. But overall, it's kind of a drive. Depending on the success or failure of it, you might have another one. Get them the live rep then and there. Get them out of the game. They were able to dress up, warm up, get in the routine, get in the feeling again of what it's like going into a game once, and that's it. Like that's all we need. We don't need it extended further. We don't even need, if there's one more drive at the end of the half, I don't need to see them in a 2-minute drill here. It's like, no. Like if you already got your drive or two, that's it. And then moving forward, that's all you'll see until the games start mattering. That's the camp I live in. I'm not necessarily where I like it, where you just don't play at all in preseason. I think there's a value in kind of doing the game day routine situation and then actually going into the game and playing a drive or two. I think there is value in that, but that's the extent of it. That's the most I would say, nothing more. Do not stretch it from there.
Yeah, I'm with you. I don't need to see these guys play too long. I do think there's value added in getting the reps. And it's funny because the team they're sitting across from this weekend to me is the best example of a team that tends to push the limits as going as hard as you can in preseason and training camp, obviously within the guidelines of the CBA. And you've talked about now for years how the Steelers are just a team that historically starts fast in the regular season. You never want to bet against the Steelers week 1. And part of that could be that they are one of the more physical teams that attacks preseason more aggressively. So when you get to that week 1 date, they've been hitting, they've been tackling, they are used to the physicality while the other team is ramping up. But taking a look at this game tomorrow, Luka, it doesn't have to be a starter. When you look at this Bills roster, which players stand out to you as having the most pressure on them to perform well in this game against the Steelers?
I believe most. Do I have to stick to one? I guess
No, we'll just
okay. We could just
go a
discuss them
couple
all. All right.
examples and talk through them.
Yeah. Okay. So I would say right now the first standout to me is Tyrell Dodson, just because the middle linebacker is, of course, a highlighted position. It's noteworthy. Dodson wasn't a train wreck or a disaster by any stretch, but he still wasn't what seemed to be comfortable or someone that you could really feel good about going into week 1 at this point, based on the one game we've already seen. So I think there's still a pressure to it. And I think there's still pressure with him going into this game. And then just, I'll put it, there's the wide receiver battle, or kind of the wide receiver depth battle, is a fascinating one to me, because out of what seems to be nowhere, there really is kind of that 5-6 spot is a bubble now. there's no longer kind of a drop off after that 6 spot, and it would really take someone shining to then change your mind about that 5-6. All of a sudden, you have kind of someone that's standing out when it comes to Isabella, which I don't believe there's pressure on for what it's worth. It's kind of like he can excel. He's got no pressure on him. The pressure's on Shakir more so than anyone else to really solidify himself in that wide receiver depth, so that if Isabella, for whatever reasons, has another really kind of eye-popping game when it comes to just popping on film, really good burst with him, all of a sudden he could really be giving Shakir, a run for his money and potentially stealing that spot from Shakir.
Let's talk about Andy Isabella. I do want to get back to Dodson at some point, but I feel like, Luka, Andy Isabella has become a major talking point at Bills camp. And, we have seen this before. We've seen this with guys like Brandon Riley. We've seen this with guys like Duke Williams. If you're old enough, you go back to Rick Rodgers or another guy named Antonio Brown, not the real one. I guess he's a real one. But what's interesting about Andy Isabella is, one, he has talent because he was a second-round draft pick back in the 2019 draft, and he has 4.3 speed in the low 4.3s, but it's not like a situation where it's track speed, but it doesn't translate to the football field. When you watch him play, his speed pops, his quickness jumps off your screen. But then you have to wonder, why is he on his third team already, this deep into his career? I watch him play, and for as elusive as he looks, I do think he's a bit of a body catcher. But the path for him to make this roster, you mentioned it, is one, he has to crack that top 6, which means either Khalil Shakir or Justin Shorter are getting bumped. And there's a couple other scenarios. I think he could win the kick return job, and that would help kind of replace Nyheim Hines. Then you're not even really thinking about him as a wide receiver spot, just more of the Nyheim Hines spot. Or the Bills just make the conscious decision to keep 7 receivers, but then you're talking about losing a guy like a Jordan Phillips, a Shaq Lawson, a DeMar Hamlin, a Cam Lewis, somebody like that. Let's talk about the top 6 wide receivers, though, because I think we can all agree the top 4 are pretty set. It's Stephon Diggs, Gabe Davis, Deontay Hardy, and Trent Sherfield. Hardy and Sherfield, whatever order you want. And then 5 and 6 is where it gets interesting. You have Khalil Shakir and Justin Shorter, both of which are 5th-round picks of the Bills from the last 2 drafts, both of which have intriguing skill sets, but neither of which have really performed at the level we have heard Andy Isabella has performed at. And right now, Luka, I think what the Bills have to be wrestling with is this too soon to give up on an investment that you've made in the draft so recently?
I don't think there's a such thing as too soon. I think generally that kind of situation when it comes to investment in draft, especially, and we're talking day 3 guys. We're not talking, first round, second round, or even, third round. We're talking day 3 guys, and even 4th round, I would put kind of in that upper echelon. 5, 6, 7 is more what I'm talking about here. That is kind of the tiebreaker. I think if it's a true coin flip, or at least is kind of on its edge where you really can give pros and cons that are equal for whoever the 2 individuals are, then you kind of side with that 5th, 6th, or 7th round pick, only because you have them more on a fixed salary, and you did put a small investment in them in the first place that you just want to see it out if it's a tie. The thing is, though, if Isabella comes in and he just shows that he gives this team something completely different that maybe Shakir cannot give with whatever he excels at, and the pros of Isabella just outweigh what Shakir's pros are, if Isabella is just a kind of a bump in returner, and then he has that kind of straight line speed that you've mentioned, and it's just a little bit quicker and more of a burst than Shakir, it's harder and harder then to give him that tiebreaker. And just because you drafted Shakir shouldn't be kind of we did draft him, so we got to stick with this guy. That should not be the end all be all. That it's not a 1st, 2nd, 3rd, or even potentially 4th round pick. It's a 5, 6, 7. It's some sort of investment, but it's not one that should sway you by any stretch of the imagination whatsoever. And it's just, if Isabella wins it, man, Isabella should win it. It's, whoever it is, it doesn't matter that we're talking about Isabella himself. Like, it doesn't matter what kind of fanboyish you might have about Isabella. In a general sense, if a guy comes in and just gives you more pros than the individual you drafted in those later rounds, you should be going with the guy who gives you a better chance to do things moving forward.
And it's funny because if you were going to make an argument against keeping Andy Isabella, and it wasn't just framed around the fact of rolling your eyes at the fact that he's standing out in August, we can all understand that. But one, it is how many times have you seen a player be on 3 different teams essentially by the time his rookie contract is up and still become a thriving player in the NFL. And the other one is, do we have a track record of Brandon Beane being willing to give up on a draft pick this early into his tenure? And it's funny, Luka, because I found an example that kind of checks both boxes. In 2017, the Bills drafted Zay Jones in the second round. They traded up for him. Now, that was not a Brandon Beane pick technically. That was a Sean McDermott pick. Brandon Beane was hired like a month later. But it was this regime. And by 2019, 7 games into the season, Zay Jones was a former Buffalo Bill. So he got 2.5 years of runway. But that's a second round pick they traded up for. And the other box he checks is he went to the Raiders. He was okay. He was okay with the Bills. And then last year in Jacksonville, he became a very productive football player, had over 800 yards receiving. He had over 80 catches. If we got that out of Andy Isabella this year, the Bills will be doing backflips. So it's funny how I do think there is a path for this to be a conversation. But what I also firmly believe is that the Bills are going to want Khalil Shakir, Justin Shorter, and Andy Isabella in their building. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean, I think there are 2 roster spots for 2 of these receivers and 1 practice squad spot if they can get one of them on the practice squad. And the way my mind works, Luka, is I think the Bills might think they have a better shot of getting Andy Isabella through waivers onto the practice squad because the fact that he's already been given up on by 2 teams. And Justin Shorter right now is a mystery box. We don't really know what he is. He was a 5th round pick. Some people thought that was a little high for him, but it's just hard to imagine that 31 teams would look at a guy that was a 5th round pick a couple months ago and not even take a shot on their active roster. And then we all know Khalil Shakir was a guy that was talked about going as high in the 3rd round 2 years ago. So it stands to reason that a team would look at him and say, oh, he's better than what we have at wide receiver 6. So I think if the Bills are holding firm to 6 wide receivers and they're committed to keeping all 3 of these in-house somehow, some way, that Andy Isabella would be on the outside looking in that scenario.
That makes sense. I mean, if you're trying to play that game where if one is going to be accessible to the public, we'll call it, or the rest of the teams, it seems like you have a best chance of someone staying in-house with Isabella only because he has already been overlooked. He's been into, organizations as it is and been moved on from fairly quickly by both. Obviously, the Ravens more so than the Cardinals, but even the Cardinals who had drafted him kind of really gave up on him after about a year and a half, 2 years. They were trying to move him a lot and then eventually just cut him in 2022. So it makes a lot of sense if you're trying to basically manage assets as best as you can. I just look at it in the sense of I want to know what 53 individuals will do the best for me. And then if it doesn't work out in such a way, yes, you will probably have to make a tough decision there. If it is close enough to them where they are comfortable playing that game, I fully understand it. And that's fine. It's just an interesting thing where it's almost kind of come out of nowhere, but at the same time, it's justified in its own right. It's one of those situations where you can't believe what's going on right now. He goes from signed off the street to start training camp to all of a sudden getting reps with Josh Allen to potentially we are going to see him tomorrow on the field with Josh Allen just to see what he can do. It just has happened so quick. And yet there's video evidence and there's proof in the pudding that shows why that's warranted and why this front office, why the coaching staff wants to see that. They want to see meaningful snaps and see potentially what could happen with that. And if he continues to excel, it becomes harder and harder to deny him a spot on the 53.
Sarah Christine watching on YouTube. If you're like Sarah and you're watching on YouTube, we would love it if you took a moment to like the video and subscribe to the Built in Buffalo channel. Our team at Built in Buffalo is trying to make this kind of a one-stop shop for all Buffalo Bills content. And if you subscribe, you'll get notifications every time we go live. We have shows going Monday through Sunday, every day of the week. Once the season starts up, we're excited about what's coming this season. Sarah has a great question here. Why hype him up and give him his own press conference? And that was interesting this week, Luka. Andy Isabella had a press conference I think caught us all by surprise. Sarah, my understanding, and I don't know that I'm 100% right here, but my understanding how the training camp press conferences go is essentially McDermott is going to speak once a week and preseason also. Josh Allen is going to speak once a week. And then from there, it comes down to media requests and whether they get denied or not. Like, for example, I know that Tyrell Dodson, they requested to hear from him earlier this week and he declined. So it could just be as simple, Sarah, that because Andy Isabella is gaining traction with Bills fans, with Bills content, that they wanted to hear from him and they requested it and he accepted it. I don't know that it was something where the Bills were like, okay, we've heard from Hyde, we've heard from Poyer, we've heard from Ed Oliver. Let's get Andy Isabella out there. I could be wrong. That's kind of my read on it, though. I wouldn't think that the press conferences is like an intel there. Intel is not a word. A tell all as far as if he's going to make the team. I'm all over the place right now, Luka. But what I will say is what happened this week. There were videos coming out of Josh Allen throwing passes to Andy Isabella in practice. They do not waste Josh Allen practice reps, Luka. That to me, I'm going to try to get this right this time, is a telltale sign that Andy Isabella is at least in the conversation. And Josh Allen had a press conference this week and reiterated how much fun it is to throw Andy Isabella the ball, echoing the comments that Kyle Allen made after the preseason game last week. When you hear that, that gets my mind thinking there is a path for him. And one last thing, Luka, before we move on to another topic, I'll give you one more comment on Isabella if you want one, but the Bills are in a specific spot here where they are trying to win a championship. And it can't be about optics of losing draft picks. So if they decide that Justin Shorter is not as good of a football player as Andy Isabella in 2023, and we all understand there's a very realistic possibility that Alex Austin and Nick Broker do not make this roster out of camp. And the Bills, if they release Justin Shorter, could be staring straight in the face of all three of their day 3 draft picks, not even on the team. That is a bad look. Who cares? I don't care about optics. I care about production. Who's going to help you beat the Chiefs when you go to Arrowhead? It's not about what the writers at NFLdraft.com or whatever tell you what your draft grade is because how many rookies you have starting on your team. It's about making plays in big moments and big spots. That's where the Bills mentality has to be, Luka. And I do think they will prioritize that as they shape this roster.
Absolutely. It's perfectly said. That's a great final point to do. I'll just do a fun fact here real quick. And it might skew some individuals out there if they see this. Just fun fact. The Hail Murray, as everyone knows and remembers, was technically a play that was designed to go to Isabella, not DeAndre Hopkins. Just a fun fact if you didn't realize that one out there. There is actual video evidence that completely verifies that information. I just always found that funny that then Arizona just goes and moves on from him a season later. It's like they were designing last second game plays to go to him. I mean, understandably, he was fast. He's one of their fastest guys on the field. You want to try to do that in that moment in time. It's just fun fact. It was actually a play where essentially it's a verts with a Texas in going across the field that then you would hit Isabella. That didn't happen. And all of a sudden he hits DeAndre Hopkins in the end zone. And we all know the final story to that. But fun fact.
Verts with a Texas in. You know how I can tell you've been playing Madden today, Luka, is when you start saying things like verts with a Texas in. It's funny you mentioned the way Andy Isabella was used because I said that was going to be the last thing I say about him. But I was doing some research on him this week for a video I put out on our Bills Chat YouTube page. His usage in Arizona was such a head scratcher. So I know we're thinking of him as maybe being like a slot receiver in Buffalo. He did not play primarily slot in Arizona. In fact, 2020 was the only season where slot was his primary position, and he had his best season there, but it wasn't much. It was like 224 yards. But what's interesting, he had like 25 catches that year. I don't have my specific notes in front of me. 4 of them were behind the line of scrimmage. Cliff Kingsbury's offense in the NFL was an utter disaster. At the risk of going on for 10 more minutes, I'm going to shift the conversation because I know that is a frustration point of my guy Luka over there. But I think that is another reason to think that maybe there's some untapped potential here because the usage in Arizona or the lack of creativity or the lack of understanding of what works in the NFL. Luka, you mentioned Tyrell Dodson, and boy, has he had a week. And I think all things being equal, people would say that he did not have a good preseason game against the Colts. I went back and watched on rewatch a couple times, really focusing in on him. And it just seemed to me like he was playing way too fast. Like his adrenaline was on 150. And that's where it led to me. Like he made the right read, but then he'd overrun his gap, or he'd made the right read, but he was going in too fast, messed up his technique and didn't make a tackle. But I never really felt like he was making slow reads. And then what we've seen in practice this week, back-to-back days of Tyrell Dodson essentially getting thrown off the field for starting a fight. I want to have 2 separate conversations right now. One, there was some pushback on Twitter of like Tyrell Dodson needs to calm down. Don't be fighting out there. Folks, I hate to say this because it's not the most analytical way to look at football. And look, I'm not comparing Tyrell Dodson to London Fletcher as a player. I'm not. So let's all get that clear. And for the kids out there, cover your ears. I'm going to say a bad word. I won't do it again. I don't mind having an asshole on defense. I think you need them. And quite honestly, I think this Bills defense could use a couple more assholes. I said it twice on defense. It's one reason why I miss Jerry Hughes, because Jerry Hughes was a snot spitter. Jerry Hughes would be arguing with the other team's offense all the way back to the huddle. And yeah, it looks immature, but that's the kind of guy that gives your players energy. It's one reason why I was excited when Jordan Phillips and Shaq Lawson came back. It's something that Luka talked about in our Bengals postgame show is like, okay, great. You guys are good at football, but I don't want nice guys. I want guys that are going to go out there and take the game from you, show the attitude that we saw from Eli Apple in that game of all people of like, we're going to stick it to you. And I don't mind if my middle linebacker has an attitude, has a chip on his shoulder and is trying to start fights, but the production has to be there. But one simple conversation, Luka, I don't think it's the worst thing in the world if you have a fiery middle linebacker.
No, absolutely not. It's someone that then the quarterback of the opposition has to look at pre-snap every play. And if that face is reminding you of something before every play, that's essentially something that got frustrating or is just whatever's going on, that he is just constantly reminding you of what it is, similar to like what you mentioned what Jerry Hughes used to do. It's a benefit to you because the other guys in the huddle for you, for the defense can vibe off of that. They can feed off of that energy and off of that aggressiveness. And then on top of it, the other team has to think about it. And it's going to be something that they are reminded of time and time again, because you are constantly having that attitude and that edge towards them. There's nothing wrong with that. And then even out there, it was, of course, when it was initially reported that he used a helmet as a weapon or however it was phrased. I don't remember the exact phrasing or whatever the original kind of report was. And then immediately, I believe it was within half an hour, it was coming out that he even came out and said, I was not using a helmet as a weapon, like you would know. And everyone denied that. And it clearly was not the case. It's like, yeah, he didn't go over the edge. He was just being aggressive. He's being emotional. And I have, as you mentioned, no problem with emotions on the field. You need those types of guys. Like it's funny. It's something that even you go up and down the ranks, any sport at any level, whether you're recreational doing something in your mid 30s, all the way to professional sports at any level, there's always individuals who are very emotional and let you know about it. And those people matter, and they can actually affect the game just based on words and emotion. It's just the nature of sport and competitive nature. Like that is just how it works. And you need those individuals. You can't just be bland. You can't be robotic, things like that. You have to have emotion out there because it can set standards. It can bring you to another level. It can have its negative impact as well. That's why you have to understand where that line is and always kind of tread it, be kind of tipping your toe over it, but do not go over the line all the way through, and just make things happen when at all possible.
The fact that a Luka family member does not mind trash talk is the least surprising development of this entire show.
Shout out,
because
Mom.
I feel like Luka talks trash in his sleep. All right. I would say that right now I am concerned about the middle linebacker position. I will just be honest. I did not need the Bills to re-sign Tremaine Edmunds. I think Tremaine Edmunds is excellent. I'm happy he got paid. I did not need the Bills to lead the league in salary at off-ball linebacker. We have one excellent one in Matt Milano. It's one of those positions you should be able to find a replacement level player, and your defense should be fine. It is concerning that the Bills have now spent back-to-back day 2 picks on middle linebackers, off-ball linebackers with Terrell Bernard and Dorian Williams, and it doesn't appear that either one of them are tracking towards starting. Terrell Bernard obviously has the injury situation. Dorian Williams is now being fast-tracked for the off-ball weak side linebacker to kind of back up Matt Milano. But if Tyrell Dodson struggles again, there is another name on this roster that I think becomes interesting. Balin Spector's been dealing with an injury. Roy Collins just brought it up. Well, not in a good way, but AJ Klein. AJ Klein, we mentioned when they brought him back, was kind of like break glass in case of emergency. He's going to be there on the practice squad. He's like a baseline, a poor man's Dane Jackson in a sense, where it's like, you know what you get, you know what your floor is. There's not really a ceiling there, but you at least know what you're going to get. At least at Dane Jackson's place, it's like it's starter-ish level, where AJ Klein, it's like, okay, we'll survive this game. I don't think that's something that the Bills would want to do, but Luka, at least it's a move the Bills can do. But do you think the opportunity now is open for someone like a Spector if he plays, or maybe even reopening the conversation around Dorian Williams for one of them to swoop in? Or do you think that at this point they're pot committed to Tyrell Dodson?
I don't think they're pot committed. I have come off that. And I came off of that when it's just been kind of since the preseason game, it has not been a good week. It's not trending the right direction. And he really has kind of, he has the most pressure tomorrow. He is absolutely the one with the most pressure tomorrow. There is everything on the line for him. And he is a few mistakes, a bad tape, whatever you want to call it, away from completely losing hold of something that was kind of, it wasn't being handed to him, but it was his opportunity to lose, basically, to start training camp and start this preseason. And it's a very quick decline, and it's not good. It's not good to see something like that, because that could affect a player if he loses the job, if he ends up not winning the job and AJ Klein becomes the guy. That could affect a guy's confidence to a point where you might not even have a good depth player because he just does not feel valued on the team anymore. He doesn't feel like he's good enough, and that's why he's not out there in the first place. Shout out to the air raid football guys. Like, they've been kind of pumping these tires lately of doing AJ Klein as this day one starter at middle linebacker. I find it hilarious every time I see that stuff, but I don't mean that in any disrespectful way. It's just, that's the point of where we're at currently with the position, that you have individuals who watch a lot of tape, who understand the game, who are kind of taking their shot and saying, hey, AJ Klein might be winning this position battle. And it's not exactly a good thing if that happens. It just might be a reality that sadly comes to be. And I would like to see it still be an open game. And the one thing I will say, though, and you brought up Dorian Williams, that's the one that I am not willing to open the door on. I'm not willing to risk. I want to see him at middle linebacker at some point in his career, because I think he has the potential, even if some feel he's slightly undersized for whatever reason. I think he has a mentality there. If they are committed to this development plan that they have in place for him, you do not adjust course because others are not filling that hole. I don't. If that is what you are comfortable with, if that's what you think is right for the player for the long-term future right now, as you just drafted him, you stick to course, you let that be the course for him, and then you just figure out the middle linebacker with everyone else. That is the way to play that moving forward.
Interesting, because I'm getting flashbacks to Josh Allen's rookie year. And it felt like if the Bills had it their way, Josh Allen would not have played his rookie year. They would have let Nathan Peterman play the season. And they basically saw 2 quarters of football and they were like, well, this ain't going to work. So it's like, hey, plan A isn't working. Josh Allen, we know you want to develop, but guess what? You're going to develop on the field. And when he got hurt, it was like, you know what? We're going to go sign Derek Anderson off the street because he has to be a better idea than Nathan Peterman. I understand where you're coming from. I do think that having a development plan is important. You mentioned the air raid guys. I like those guys. I feel like we should get them on our show sometime, and maybe as soon as next week. Some announcement coming this week. You never know. Stay tuned to Bill's Chat on Twitter. We have something fun planned next week, and we are looking forward to sharing that with you. Luka, I want to talk about the cornerback position, and I'll tell you, I normally on a game week, I do a bunch of research on the opponent. I try to get the temperature of what their fan base and what their content creators are talking about. I don't do it as much in preseason just because these games are not game plan specific, but I did take in a couple of Steelers podcasts to get a feeling for the pulse of the team. It is hilarious how similar the conversations are in Pittsburgh and Buffalo regarding the veteran at cornerback, a former Bill, Levi Wallace, and the draft pick at cornerback, Joey Porter Jr. And why can he not get on the field? We drafted him for a reason, top of the second round. We know what we have in Levi Wallace. What are we doing? And it's like, well, he's not quite ready yet. There's some things in his game. He's a good man press corner, but the rest of his game still isn't ironed out. And it's like, oh my God, this is the Kyer Elam, Dane Jackson conversation, kind of. Kyer Elam was a first round pick. That's only like a 9-pick difference though, because Joey Porter was a first pick of the second round. And this is Porter's first year where Kyer Elam is going into the second year. But I found that interesting. How much pressure do you think is on Benford and Elam this week? And if neither one of them make a move, is this game set match?
I wouldn't say game set match, but in the same regard, this is really the biggest last opportunity, because I don't anticipate those guys playing much next week, if at all. Especially like if one of them is not playing next week, that is kind of the message when it's like, okay, that's who won the position battle. That's who it is. Also, it's funny. The comparison is even further than that because the solidified guy opposite of them is an LSU star and is veteran.
That's true.
Boom. So anyway,
Josh Allen's favorite receiver in the Viking game last
I was
year.
just making sure too. Trey White never got the number 7 because if he did, then it would have been like, okay, this is just this is over. No, so I think it's not over based on what happens on this game. I just think this is kind of your last hurrah. And if there's a time to really step up and try to really grab the reins, this is the time to do it. What I'm fearing though is based on what we saw last week, if they get more time or they get equal time when it comes to Benford and Kyer, I don't know if we've heard anything when it comes to a lot of coaching going on with Kyer this week. We haven't heard anything stand out when it comes to this position battle. And clearly that needed to happen for Kyer because there was a lot of holding going on before the preseason game. There was clear moments where he was doing it in the game. He even got flagged at certain times for it. It's something that's always been a knock on him. And it's like, if you give him more playing time in this game and it continues, I think that almost could ruin his situation going into week 1, at least of this season. And it's like, you would have loved to have heard that through this week, there was even a point of emphasis to kind of make sure they hammer that into him going into this week, because it is such a big opportunity. Maybe that has been happening behind the scenes. I just would have loved to heard that. I would love to have heard that publicly as well. Christian Benford to me is kind of the guy where I'm looking and it's like, he has a real opportunity in front of him because he's so sound and he still has a lot of potential with him. If he can have a good game against Pickett and Pickens and whatever he's facing this week, he could definitely, I feel like, propel himself into the starting role opposite of Trey White. I feel more confident thinking that Benford will do that as well, only because I think Kyer's grabbiness and handiness, when it comes to his coverage and his ability or lack thereof to stay on the hip without grabbing, that's going to be something that I will be watching very closely when it comes to the game tomorrow.
I'm with you on Benford. I would like to see him get a real look at this. And I do think that he has a chance to be a better player than Dane Jackson this year. And I would like to see him get that shot. Luka, the Bills had a player retire this week. Brandon Shell. And I would say, I don't want to speak for you. I don't think either one of us were overly optimistic about that signing when it happened. PFF was not necessarily in love with him. He filled in admirably for the Dolphins last year, but their offensive line was pretty terrible as it is. And he's no longer a Buffalo Bill. He's decided to hang it up. And that leaves the Bills in an interesting spot at tackle on their roster because they obviously have Deion Dawkins and Spencer Brown. But behind that, we have the same question marks we've been having, and they lost one of their insurance policies in Brandon Shell. You have David Quessenberry, who I think is a roster lock at this point. It feels like that to me. He's playing that Bobby Hart tight end role. So it just feels like all things are turning to him being the third tackle in the game, whether it's right or left. You have Tommy Doyle coming back from the ACL injury, had the injury in the game last week. Seems like he's okay from there. And then you have a couple of interesting young players in Richard Garage, who was the Bills' third highest graded offensive lineman per PFF last week in the game, undrafted tackle from Florida. And then another player, Ryan Vandemark, who the Bills signed from the Colts last preseason, is a guy that came in ahead of David Quessenberry as the second left tackle off the bench in the game last week. We talked about this last week on the show that it would be great to see one of these lesser known tackles step up and make it a conversation. Well, Brandon Shell made a conversation by leaving, but I think both of these players also have kind of done their part too.
I almost wonder if that played into it, not saying that Shell would make a decision off of, someone else's career or whatever's going on with them. But I just wonder if, him seeing someone else go out there in front of him and then he himself going in there that he potentially thought he was above initially, all of a sudden he didn't have it. He was kind of having a poor performance and overall just was like, hey, I don't got it anymore. I need to hang them up. It's not worth my time. It's, things like that. And respect to that, by the way, like respect to Shell for understanding that it just wasn't for him anymore. At his age, you could definitely see an individual trying to hang on to it as much as they possibly can. But he just recognized that the game wasn't there anymore, and he's just going to do it before he hurts himself any further, does anything to put his, future life at risk due to severe injuries, whatever it is. And I'm not saying like life at risk, but you understand it's like make his life not as fun to live past football. He understands that moment has come. Wish him all the best. And then, yeah, Vandemark and everything like that. It's like, hey, step up. We need depth tackles. That's something that you absolutely have the potential to win a legitimate role at. And, if injuries come, which they do happen with offensive linemen a lot, you would like to be more comfortable with one of these guys in another preseason game here moving forward to show us that they are going to be serviceable whenever that time comes. If that time comes, fingers crossed it doesn't, but it almost seems inevitable with linemen, I'll be honest. And it's like, hey, if that moment comes, I want to be comfortable with you because we know what we have in Questenberry. We know what we have in Doyle, stuff like that. It's like, hey, if another one of these guys can be a better safety blanket for us, that would be phenomenal.
Yeah, it's a shame. I think the Bills maybe had higher hopes for him than we did, but Luka, it just became obvious that Brandon was a shell of himself.
Oh, come on now. Jeez. Low-hanging fruit.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Come on.
There's a name out there the Bills could sign, Luka. He's familiar to the Bills. Jason Peters has made it be known that he would like to play another year. Do you have any interest in the Bills having a reunion with Jason Peters? Last season, just for context, he played 235 snaps, 139 of them at left tackle. PFF liked his run blocking grades, grade him as an above average starter in run blocking and overall, and grade him as an average starter in pass blocking. What are your thoughts on Jason Peters?
Look, if he thinks he still has a step at his age and he is willing to go, and the last time we saw him on a field, which I believe was with Dallas, correct? I believe all that last season was with Dallas. Sorry if I'm wrong, but overall, it's like if he still has it and he put together something where it's like, hey, he might be an average to above average starter, and we don't need him to necessarily be a starter, but it's like if he's there because we need him due to injury, that's not a bad guy to have. I am very open to that idea because he has obviously a history in his better days where he was a very high end starter. And it's like he understands the game. His body is just where it is due to father time. And it's like, sit on the bench when we need you. If we need you, hopefully you can get us through whatever we need you to. And there's not a lot of other good options out there. And if you just don't have the option in-house, I am very okay with bringing him in.
Yeah, it looks like he spent some time on Dallas and the Bears last year. That's where my mind was wondering. I was like, I know it was the Bears, but I also heard the Dallas thing. Yeah, I'm at a point with the offensive line, Luka, where I don't think there are any bad ideas because I want to transition into this next topic here. What is your biggest concern about these Buffalo Bills? What is it that you think if they don't make the ultimate goal of winning the Super Bowl and not something outside of the building like, oh, my concern is the Chiefs are better or the Bengals are better, but internally at this roster, what is your biggest concern? Because I will tell you, my answer is offensive line, and I don't know how close it is because when you look at what they have, Deion Dawkins is good, not great. Mitch Morse is good, not great. And from there, you have a bunch of question marks. Connor McGovern is a mid-level free agent coming over from Dallas, got a good contract, but has never really been great in his career. First-year starter for the Bills. On the right side, it's either going to be Ryan Bates, who's kind of a baseline starter, or Cyrus Torrence, who's a rookie. And then at right tackle, you have Spencer Brown, who had a really down year last year. And we're just kind of hoping beyond hope that was because of his back injury. My biggest concern, Luka, I don't need this offensive line to be top 5 in the league. I quite frankly don't think there's a path to this offensive line being top 5 in this league.
For sure.
I need them to be top 20. Can they be top 20? Because I think that's good enough to get the Bills where they need to get to. What is your biggest concern right now with the Bills?
So I'll just say that I'm aligned with you on this. I think offensive line overall has a bigger impact of a question mark when it comes to everything else. But I'll even kind of divert this question a little bit and just phrase it in a different way somewhat. My biggest points of concern or my biggest questions with this roster become two simple things. It's what is easier to disguise, a below average offensive line or kind of a fill in at middle linebacker and we'll see what we can do. The obvious answer to me is offensive line, and that's why they become the biggest concern because it's the most glaring thing when your offense and your MVP guy Josh Allen is struggling to feel comfortable because you have 5 guys who just can't figure it out in front of him. There's nothing you can do to disguise that. There's nothing you can do to kind of manage around that as much as you can. You can devise a quicker passing game. You can do all of those things that they talk about that can disguise subpar offensive lines, like Tampa Bay, for instance, who didn't have the most impressive offensive line. But even we talked about it in our 23 Rivals Watch about the others when we had Tampa on the roster there. It's like, hey, Brady's release obviously disguised some problems in front of him. that's just not how things work. Josh Allen eventually needs to improvise and do what he loves to do and do his thing. And it's like at those moments in time, it's going to be obvious you can disguise the middle linebacker situation. You have so many all pros and high end guys on the rest of that defense littered all over the place that if it is Tyrod Dotson, if it's AJ Klein, things like that, it's not going to be the prettiest of sights, but there's enough talent around there that that one individual is not going to be that the biggest detriment to the team and that unit overall. The offensive line can really kill you on games. We've seen it even at a high end level. It's like you go up against the Jags and you have a bunch of depth offensive line out there and subpar play. Josh Allen can't do anything. He doesn't have time to be comfortable. That's a massive issue. So yeah, I mean, the biggest concern should be offensive line, and no, it's not close. That is clearly the biggest question mark. My whole thing is, though, the potential is at least more promising than it's been in the past few years because of an individual like O'Cyrus Torrence, and we don't know yet truly what we have in McGovern and stuff like that. It's like there is at least pieces there that are different from years past that give you some sort of optimism that maybe it can be top 20 or even, fingers crossed, top 16, be in the top half of the league. Boy, I would love to see this team with something like that.
I agree. I do think that Saturday will be a good litmus test for them because as far as preseason goes, this is a good environment for them to test themselves because they're going to be on the road. It should be a louder environment in Pittsburgh. Loud is relative because it's preseason. The Steelers are going to be playing their starters. Mike Tomlin confirmed that TJ Watt will be out there. Highsmith will be out there. And let's just see how the communication goes with a first-year Buffalo Bills in McGovern on the left side. And if Torrance starts on the right side of Mitch Morse, how does that look? How does Spencer Brown go if he has reps lined up one-on-one with TJ Watt? That'll be interesting to see. Like, is he really coming back from that back injury and ready to roll? How does Deion Dawkins look? He hasn't had the best camp, quite honestly. So I think this would be a good opportunity to really evaluate this offensive line. Luka, any final thoughts on the Bills, on this preseason matchup? Anything you're looking forward to that we haven't talked about yet?
Just looking forward to seeing 17 on the field, first and foremost. It's going to be fun to see that again, finally. But no, I mean, the final thoughts really on this game and what we have going on tomorrow really come down to just paying attention to the offensive line, see what happens with, again, O'Cyrus Torrence, Bates, and that whole situation, seeing what they do with the tackle positions. Obviously, paying attention to what they do with the tackle positions as soon as Allen is off the field is going to be kind of the biggest tell on what they feel like at depth tackle, because the depth tackles will not be out there when Allen is out there, of course. You put your starters out there at all times. Like if I see O'Cyrus Torrence on snap one out there with Allen and everyone else on the field, that to me is a big, big sign. I don't know if I anticipate seeing that, but I will just say that is going to be, of course, a snap I pay attention to greatly. And then the corners, I will be fascinated to see what they do with Trey, what they do with Dane, stuff like that overall, kind of how they handle that. I don't know. Like they're saying Allen's going to play, so I would imagine Trey White's going to play some. If you're putting your franchise out there, everyone else better suit up and play unless they're knocked. But it's like I'm curious to see what they do with that situation. I imagine I see a world where we'll see Trey and Dane out there to start, and then maybe they'll cycle in Kyer next to Trey. Whatever the situation might be, we will find out, and that's what I'm more intrigued with because it's kind of the loose way to figure out the depth chart. It's the best way to figure out where players stand and what they feel about them because the top of the hierarchy, number 17, will be out there. So it's the best time to pay attention how this coaching staff at this point in time feels about everyone underneath 17.
The one last thing I will mention is I'm interested in seeing the wide receivers 2 through 5 because last week it was interesting, but there's the caveat that Diggs didn't play. So everything was kind of shaken up. With Diggs out, Sherfield got the VIP treatment. He got the you're in for 5 snaps, you're out. And that was like, whoa, is Sherfield an A-list player on this team? I'm cool with that. But is that a real thing? With Diggs and Davis out there now, who lines up in the slot? Because interestingly enough, Khalil Shakir did not get a lot of slot snaps last week. The majority of his were out wide. Deontay Hardy took the majority of the slot snaps last week. And Trent Sherfield, like I said, was A-list and out. How does that shake out with Diggs on the field now? If Trent Sherfield takes a seat after the first quarter and a half, then I think we know who wide receiver 3 is. That to me is like, second time I've said it, game, set, match. And I haven't even watched tennis in probably 2 years, except for Jesse Pagula. But what does Khalil Shakir do? Does he play in the slot? Because the truth of the matter is, unless you're going to see a role where Stephon Diggs lines up in the slot more, this third wide receiver on the Bills is going to have to be somebody that excels in the slot on the snaps. that Dalton Kincaid is not on the field as that primary slot receiver. So I think that's going to be very interesting to track. I'm very interested to see how the Bills handle their wide receiver situation. All right, Luka, there's no real easy transition here, but tough news yesterday for Buffalo sports fans, as we are going to now change our background here to Sabres chat, just to, pay homage to the Sabres right now, because, Sabres fans are hurting today. Buffalo sports fans are hurting today. For those that don't know, Rick Jeanneret, the play-by-play man for the Sabres since 1971, passed away yesterday. And Luka, there was just such an outpouring of support and love for Rick Jeanneret, what he meant to the Sabres, what he meant to the fans. And I don't hide from this. I live in St. Louis. Hockey is not my first love. I think in a lot of ways it is yours. So you're certainly way more ingrained in this conversation than I am, kind of from afar, just kind of having empathy for the whole situation. Just tell me what you're thinking. What are your thoughts? What are your memories? What do you think of when the name Rick Jeanneret comes up?
I mean, just to be simple about this, Rick Jeanneret to me is my childhood. He is my fandom of the Sabres. You hear it all the time, and everyone I feel like shares this sentiment, and you hear it from people that have worked with him, like Rob Ray and stuff has come out in there and said it. He is the Sabres. He is the organization. His voice is something you could recognize even if you're not watching the screen. It was to put it simply, it was like he was so good at his job as well, and you always hear great things about him as a person, but just to understand, I never met him as a person, so I can't really speak on that as much. You just hear about the wonderful things that people have to say, but just him and doing his job, like he made it. If I had to do chores on a random Tuesday evening or whatever, and the game is on, I'm okay not watching, because he had such an understanding of how to paint that picture of the game through his voice and through his words, that it made it just as equally entertaining, to be quite honest. Yes, I wanted to watch the game, of course, if at all possible, but I was very okay with just turning on WGR 550 or whatever as a kid and whatnot, and just listening to the game and stuff like that. And he would get you through so much, and like things like that, like memories that pop in my head, all the big calls that he's had. But like, I even recall just when the October storm back in 2006 happens, a memory that always pops in my mind is I sat there and still enjoyed listening to the Sabres absolutely pump the Rangers, by the way, during a game, and just on the radio. And Rick Jeanneret did a phenomenal job. Just, if I didn't have a screen in front of me, honestly, I remember it as if I did watch the game. It was just that well done. I did miss Chris Drury scoring a hat trick that game. I was quite sad about that one. But overall, he did such an amazing job that it wasn't like I was overly upset about it, because he's still just, his words resonate so well and just paint a beautiful picture of a game every time. And when I learned about his passing, kind of the first thing that it felt like was just like your childhood and your youth and everything just passing away. It's just all these fond memories I have. I'm a massive sports fan. And as you said, hockey is a massive part of my life. It's probably my most favorite sport. I love football and everything, and I love the Bills and whatnot, and football Sundays are sacred. But hockey is just, it's like a constant in my life. I love that it's on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Like, it's always there for me. It's always been there for me. And I just love it so much. And Rick Jeanneret was the voice of hockey. Like, I knew Sabres hockey before anything else. And I knew Rick Jeanneret before anything else when it comes to the game of hockey. I didn't like, I would get upset when it was the Sabres on national television, because I couldn't have Rick Jeanneret commentating the game himself. It just, he is the organization. He is everything. And he was the perfect artist to put the paint on the canvas and deliver an absolutely perfect product in his voice and everything. It was just, he was one of one. He was unbelievable. And I love Jeremy White on WGR said it so well. And others do too. It was so perfect that he was at least able to get the nights that he got last season, and kind of the farewell that he received last season. And he was able to experience that with the fans and everyone. And it wasn't something that we had to do in remembrance. It was something he was able to soak in and enjoy, and just see how much everyone loves him in this community and around in Buffalo sports in general. It's like, even if you're not a Sabres fan, as soon as I tell you, we have an acquaintance, Nino, he's not the biggest of hockey fan, but I told him about Rick Jeanneret passing, and even him, it hits someone like him, because he's just bigger than hockey. He's bigger than the sport. He was everything to this community and sports community in general.
It really is beautiful about sports, where for many of us, sports are kind of an outlet. It's kind of an escape from real life, where those 3 hours you're watching the Sabres games or listening to the Sabres games, you can kind of tune out whatever is stressing you out at work or in your personal life or whatever. And growing up, you just I think it's different even for baseball and hockey. The seasons are longer. There's many more games. All due respect to Van Miller and John Murphy, who I think, all the best in your recovery, Murph. There's just not enough football games where like with hockey and baseball, it's like that family feeling where you listen and watch so many games that even on the seasons where your team isn't having the greatest year, and maybe even more specifically in those seasons, the one constant was Rick Jeanneret. Players come and go, coaches come and go. Some seasons are good, some seasons are bad, but the guy that tell you about it and paint the picture for you, like you said, was him. And you never think about it while it's going on. It's just part of the package that comes with being a Sabres fan is Rick Jeanneret's going to call the game, and this is what I'm used to. And it's almost impossible to appreciate it until he's gone. And if I'm understanding correctly, I know he stepped away pretty much the last couple of years, right? I think that
Yeah.
probably gave fans an opportunity to kind of experience how much they did like him, how much they did need him. Like the absence makes the heart grow fonder. And I will tell you, I live in St. Louis, and it's very similar to Jack Buck, Luka. When Jack Buck was the Cardinals announcer, it was very much like you turn on your radio, Jack Buck is there, and it's like a family member. And when he died, it's like the entire city just like shut down and had a funeral. And some of the stories I'm seeing about Rick Jeanneret today are beautiful. It's why I love sports. And I think it's okay to be upset. I think in situations like this, it's a challenge for us sports fans, because you even said, I never met Rick Jeanneret, but he was the voice of my childhood. That is not nothing. That is a lot of things, because growing up, Sabres games got you through more than you even realize or you'll ever realize. They were a happy point in your life when things in your life were not always happy. I'm not just talking to Luka, I'm talking to whoever this resonates with. And Rick Jeanneret was the narrator of that situation. And it's sad. It stinks. My heart goes out to Sabres fans everywhere. I know you all are in pain today. And I just want to tell you, like, from the bottom of my heart, I'm sorry you're going through this. But the tributes to him today were beautiful. I couldn't get enough of watching the videos. Man, his last sign off as the Sabres announcer was just like chef's kiss perfect. Seemed like just an absolutely remarkable human being. And Luka, like you said, just the perfect man for that job.
Yeah, it's everything he touched is gold. Everything he said, it's everyone always says, you've heard the videos, everyone's seen the stuff out there. But everything came off the top of the head. His vocabulary was incredible. It just in the moment, understanding what needs to be said, how to accentuate it, everything like that. He seemed like the kind of person who understood at all times what was happening in front of him and how to process it in the best way possible. Whether we're talking about hockey or even outside of it, when you hear all these stories and things and understanding, like another one of my buddies even said that he did play-by-play for St. Bonaventure, and Rick Jeanneret's wife then had Rick Jeanneret himself listen to his play-by-play calls and even reach out to him and give him pointers. And that's just the kind of individual he seemed to be. He was always carrying understanding of the community feel to it, and understanding that he is just one of us. Even though we all held him in such high stature, he still made time for anyone at any point in time and understood just whatever was in front of him and just the best way to look at it. It's an incredible human being in the world lost, kind of an absolute unicorn of a man. And it's upsetting. But again, I've been kind of understanding it in a beautiful way. Every time you hear someone say it, it's like, at least he got to enjoy the accolades that came last season. At least he got to embrace, or at least he got to enjoy and soak in everything that he deserved when it came to seeing his name hung in the rafters next to all the other greats of the Sabres history, and getting that last call, having that moment to himself that's now, saved and documented, and just one more time soaking it in with the fans and saying thank you and everything. It's, at least he got to enjoy that. And it's not something we have to do in remembrance. And that's a beautiful thing. Like, that is not something that happens often. These tragic things happen and it's always in memoriam. Luckily for him, he got to enjoy it right before he unfortunately passed.
Rest in peace, Rick Jeanneret. Hearts go out to the Jeanneret family, everybody that was close to him, his friends, his family, and Sabres fans everywhere. tough day for Buffalo sports fans. And I wish you all the best in this journey as you are processing this new reality. All right, Luka, no super easy transition off of that, but I guess speaking of the Sabres, you put out a Sabres Chat episode this week. What is on the horizon for Sabres Chat coming up?
Well, this week there's not going to be one. I'm not going to go ahead and talk about the Western Conference. They're just not really worth my time. Stuff like that. You only play them maybe once or twice, and it's. But if anyone listened to the Metropolitan Division breakdown, I appreciate you. But overall, just working on kind of roster breakdown and understanding the roster more so, prospects, potential individuals who can crack the roster, what the roster shakedown should look like come preseason time, because we are sitting here. It is August 18th right now. And technically camp reports exactly a month, I believe, from yesterday. It's either yesterday, today, something around there. It's about in a month. So we will see players back in the area if they don't already live here. There's preseason games around the corner. I'll be talking preseason games at that point. And then luckily for us, NHL preseason just comes and goes real quick. And next thing you know, you're in the regular season. It will be Thursday night, October 12th. I can't remember the day, when the Sabres are hosting the Rangers for their first season game, and the season will be kicked off and rolling. So no episode this week, but working on kind of all the roster breakdown, a lot of prospect digging and whatnot, and seeing what can happen for this roster as they start reporting for training camp. Oh my goodness. No easy transition from like 5 minutes ago. And now here we are talking about AJ Klein better than Edmonds.
Josh Allen is the next Elway. Okay. I love the name. AJ Klein is better than Edmonds. People don't want to admit it, but it is what it is.
I think I have a suspicion on who this individual is, by the way.
Oh, so are we being trolled?
Maybe.
Okay. Because I was about ready to put him in timeout, not like block him or mute him, but just like jokingly say you need to go to timeout now.
Maybe.
Because the disrespect on Tremaine Edmonds is so out of hand. He was a very good player. And no, AJ Klein is not better than Tremaine Edmonds. And I think that the way that the NFL has compensated both of those players over the course of their career would tell us that. But no, there's a very realistic possibility that AJ Klein could be the Bills' next starting middle linebacker.
Buckle up.
Last topic tonight, Luka. Have you been having fun with Madden 24?
I have played some few games. There's been some ups and downs. I'm glad I'm not in any competitive leagues anymore like we used to be, you and I. I'll say that. It is a very different game from the last time we had leagues. But overall, yeah. I mean, it's not the best product. I'll be honest. EA has been living a struggle bus with all their games of late. But as long as I'm not ultra invested in kind of the competitive level, and like, you know, you have those things like connected franchise going on, I can enjoy it. I'm enjoying it so far.
Speaking of connected franchise, I'm enjoying the hell out of my series I'm actually working on over on our Bills Chat channel. It's Madden 24 Bills Franchise Mode. I put out episode 3 today, or maybe this morning. It was the week 1 matchup. I'm so off here. Episode 2 today was against the Jets. Episode 3 will come out tomorrow morning. The Bills home opener against the Raiders. You get to watch me play Madden with a big camera on my face, reacting to every mistake I make. And I'm not very good at the game, and I think that comes through pretty loud and clear in these videos. But I would love for you to come hang out and check that out. Next week on Bills Chat Live, something we're very much looking forward to. I teased it earlier, but we can go ahead and announce it now. We're going to put out some stuff about it later this week. The guys from Cover One Air Raid Hour are going to be joining us for a special edition of Bills Chat Live, as we are going to be doing a 53-man roster projection show. We're going to have the tough conversations that we think the Bills are going to have, try to simulate what that Bills front office situation might be looking like, talk about, do we want to keep 6 wide receivers or 7? What is that going to make it look like for defensive tackles? We're going to talk through all of it to get you ready for the roster cutdowns that happen on August 29th. Luka and I will be back with Bills Chat Podcast Monday morning, recapping everything that happened in the Bills-Steelers game, celebrating the fact that there were no injuries in the game. Let's just put that into the universe now. I can't believe I just said that. That feels like something I absolutely should not have said out loud. Don't make me regret it, football gods. And we'll be back next week on Bills Chat Live with the Air Raid Hour. Fellas, for Luka, I am Josh McCarty. We will see you next time on Bills Chat Live.